Oline, and salutations once again to the Truth Core, whoever and wherever you may be. I assume you're on the planet. If you're in another dimension, you can reach me using Telegram. Or you can tweak the rabbit ears on your in-body telepathic instrument. That would be your Eustachian tubes, and transmit directly to my wacky wabbit apparatus. Simple enough. So, title of his talk is The Semantics of White Supremacy, which is a direct follow-up to the talk Anti-Semantics Are the Bane of Our Existence. Sometimes I say anti, sometimes I say anti. Now, to begin, coming right out of the gates of hell, I want to make a qualification. A conversation is not an argument. I'm not looking for an argument about anything. And I can assure you that anybody who tries to argue with me has their work cut out for them. And it may well turn out to be a piece of work that they can't handle. I don't need to argue. I don't need to win an argument, though I always do. And argument is a failure of communication. So I'm not talking about arguing about the key to the ignition. I'm talking about a fair, open-minded, balanced, civic, polite conversation on that topic. Something that you typically experience when you encounter a walrus. Well, there are several typical reactions. One, they will walk away from the conversation. Or if they're a more aggressive type of walrus, they will yell at you and argue at you, not with you. They won't even argue with you. They'll argue at you. And they'll try to shut you down. Now, of course, they can't shut you down. Nobody can shut me down, short of BA, which is battery assault. So how is anybody going to shut you down or shut you up without attacking you physically? If they're not inclined to do that, they will walk away, and this is typical walrus behavior. Now again, I have a dear spot for walruses, believe it or not. But if you've ever seen any nature films about how they behave when they're crowded together on a beach, you would have to say that it's not exactly a good model of social communication, is it? So no, I don't want anyone yelling at me and condemning me and trying to shut me down. I don't present myself in the presence of other people with the intention of having an argument. On that note, however, I will raise a subject upon which severe and violent arguments could arise, and that is the subject of white supremacy. So what are the semantics of white supremacy? Well, perhaps I could illustrate it by an example, a little scenario. Go out to my backyard and lean on the fence, and my neighbor Joe comes over and he leans on his side of the fence. And I say to Joe, "How you doing today?" "I'm doing pretty well." "How about we have a conversation about white supremacy?" And then Joe says, "Well, yeah, maybe. We could." And I say, "Well, how could we? How could we set it up?" One approach would be you and I could have a framing discussion first, and we could agree on a definition of white supremacy that works for both of us, and then we could proceed to develop the dialectic, which is a fancy word from the Greek era of Socrates, and it simply means conversation. But on the other hand, I see Joe as kind of squirming, looking around furtively and furrowing his brow. I say, okay, we won't bother to do that. I would be happy to accept your definition of white supremacy, and we'll have a conversation based on that. That shall be our semantic agreement. How about that, Joe? Yeah, Joe looks at me, moves his lips around, furrows his brow. And he says, well, yeah, okay, I can get along with that. So I say, okay, Joe, give me your best shot. What's your definition of white supremacy? And this is what he says. White supremacy is a name for the ideology that endorses and enforces the presumed superiority of the white races over all other people, and it includes the agenda or objective to dominate all other people who are not white. So I listen, I take it in, and I say, fine, that's fine with me. We have a semantic agreement. We'll use your definition. I will keep true to your definition. I will not distort what you've said. I will not attack you with a straw man argument where I misrepresent what you've said. I'll do my best to be completely faithful to your definition. And Joe says, oh, okay. I can see him relax a little. Feels a little bit more comfortable with that. And so I proceed. And I say, Joe, that's a pretty accurate definition of white supremacy in the minds of many people. And I would even venture to say that it is the comprehensive, popular definition. And you don't have to look very far to see that definition, that description of white supremacy, broadcast widely all over the mainstream media and in many circles of discussion. And of course, it carries with it, naturally, a condemnation of that ideology. Agreed? And Joe says, yeah, that's the way it looks to me from my side of the fence. So I say, okay, fine. Well, let me tell you something that you might like to hear. I have absolutely no intention of refuting that definition. I'm not going to say in the course of this conversation that white supremacy is anything different than what you say it is. I'm going to go on what you say. I'm not going to argue with you or oppose you in any way. Oh, okay. Joe's looking at me, nodding his head. Hey, well, that's cool. Okay, I'm good with that. Little pause as we listen to the birds twitter in the garden. And then I take a deep breath and I say, but this is what I will do, Joe. I'll ask you to show me the evidence. And he kind of bristles at that request, which of course many people do. I say, yeah, just show me the evidence. I accept your definition. I accept the exact wording that you use. It's a name for an ideology that endorses and enforces the presumed racial superiority of white people. Can I say self-presumed? Yes. And it contains as a second clause the attribution that those white people who adhere to white supremacy want to dominate all other peoples of all other races. Am I rephrasing your definition correctly? And Joe looks around, shakes his head, says, yeah, that's pretty much what I'm saying, John. We're having this conversation in Maine. So I say, okay then, back to my question. Show me the evidence. Can you show me any written documents? Can you show me any recorded speeches? Any documentaries that feature white supremacists speaking in a way that confirms your semantic definition of what they are? Can you cite anything at all? A paragraph, a phrase, a slogan that supports your description? Because if you can do that, then I have some evidence that I can examine. Some evidence that proves and supports your definition of white supremacy. Well, guess what happens then? Well, the sound of those birds twittering in the garden begins to get really loud. And in fact, Joe cannot provide me with any evidence that supports his attributions regarding white supremacy. So, the moment of silence continues. You know, it's actually not a bad thing to have certain moments of reflective silence in the course of an honest and vital conversation. And I could tell that Joe is a little nervous and he's searching in the back of his mind, and suddenly I see a light come into his eyes and he says, yes, I know something. I know something that I heard a friend of mine told me about this. Oh yeah, what's that? Well, hold on a minute. I think I can remember it exactly because it really shocked me when I heard it. Oh, what is that? I see Joe fumbling around. Finally, he reaches down into his memory, and amazingly, he retrieves the exact syntax of the 14 words. And he says, yeah, this is it. There was a really evil white supremacist, and he spread this idea of the 14 words. Oh, really, did he? You mean David Lane, who's in prison for 190 years. Yeah, that's the guy, David Lane. David Lane. Can you remember what it was he said, Joe? Yeah, I remember. I'll never forget this. He said, in 14 words, we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. End quote. Another pause. I'm looking at Joe. He's a little bit nervous, reaches around to scratch his butt and pull his shorts out of the crack of his butt, and looks up at me, waiting for my response. And I say, yeah, I've heard those 14 words. And I must say, I can't find anything in those 14 words that corresponds to your definition of white supremacy. I mean, what do they say? We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. Well, what's so evil about that? And there's another silence. And Joe looks at me and he says, well, I don't know exactly, because I really don't know that much about this, but I was struck by that phrase, and I'm sure that there's something behind that that's pretty evil, and something behind that that supports my description, my definition. So I say, well, okay, Joe, I'm not going to argue with you, but honestly, man, in order to take a sentence that is as clear, straightforward, and innocent as that, and read something evil into it, well, I can't go there. I can't see it that way. Can you offer me any other evidence? Any other evidence at all that supports your definition of white supremacy? Another silence. And the birds twitter. And reading body language as I do, I see a kind of subtle change in Joe's posture. His shoulders drop down a little, not in defeat, but in relaxation. And it appears as if he's easing up a bit. And I'm wondering what's coming next, aren't you? And then he looks up at me, kind of blinking his eyes, and he says, well, I'm not sure where we can go with this conversation, but maybe we should switch sides. How about you telling me, you, John, telling me what is your semantic description of white supremacy? And of course, I'm quite pleased by this response. Wow. Lucky if you get a response like that in a conversation about any topic. So I say, sure, that's easy. But I have to give it to you in two parts. Can you hang on for that? Can you hold on? And Joe says, yeah, I think so. So the first part is, I believe that the common description of white supremacy is what you might call a scarecrow argument. Now, it's commonly known in public discourse that there is something called a straw man argument. You've heard of that expression, haven't you? Oh, yeah, I think I have. Well, let me refresh your memory, if I may be so bold, and without presuming too much. What it means is that when two people are having a conversation, and party one states their case. They state their view. And then party two takes that view and distorts it and makes it into something that it is not, and then bases their argument or opposition in the conversation to the misrepresentation of the view of the first party. That is called a straw man argument. In that case, the second party is not really responding to what the first party says. They're making it out to be something it isn't. And so it spoils the conversation. You can't have a genuine conversation that goes anywhere if one of the parties is mounting a straw man argument. And Joe shakes his head, moves his jaw around a little bit, like he's chewing on gum in the back of his mouth that got stuck in his back teeth. Yeah, oh yeah, that's right, I've heard that. I don't like that. I don't like it when somebody takes my words and twists them around, throws them back to me like I didn't mean them. I say, absolutely, who likes that? But I'm not talking about a straw man argument here, Joe. I'm talking about a scarecrow argument, which means that one party in a conversation invents a topic or enemy just like a scarecrow. It's not a real enemy. Scarecrow doesn't do anything except scare crows away if it's a good one. But you wouldn't be attacked if you walked into a cornfield and walked past the scarecrow, would you? But scarecrow arguments are extremely effective because they operate on fear and ignorance. So I would say that your description of white supremacy is a scarecrow argument. Its intention is to frighten people about something that in fact doesn't actually exist. Oh, okay. I'm surprised he's holding on this long, by the way, but this is an imaginary conversation after all. Oh, okay, yeah, well, oh, so that definition, which I gave you, which is the same that everybody I know has that same definition. Oh, okay. You're saying that's just an invention intended to scare people about something that doesn't really exist. Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. So I pause for a moment, and I look him in the eyes. He looks me in the eyes, and there's no aggression. It's just an open space between our gazes, you see. That open space. I'm not going to impose anything on him, but I am going to propose something. I'm going to propose my definition of white supremacy actually is. So I look at Joe, carefully, in an amiable way. I'm such a sweet guy. And I say, Joe, it looks to me like this. The word supremacy is a little off the mark. It would be better to say that there is such a thing as white superiority. But what is that exactly? Bear with me for a moment, Joe, while I clarify the semantics here. Everyone knows what the word superior means in terms of human behavior. Look at it in simple, common sense terms. No? What is superior is what is best in any area. For instance, I know that you take an interest in sound systems. And I've been over to your house and we sat down and we've listened to some music. For instance, you love Metallica, right? Joe says, oh yeah, Metallica. I say, okay. And when I was over to your house a few times, you played this Metallica album for me on a phonograph with an old-fashioned receiver and sound system that is constructed out of tubes. Like the original kind of hi-fi stereo sound systems. You really take an interest in that equipment, don't you? And I remember distinctly once you telling me when we first met that the sound that comes off vinyl records that are well-recorded vinyl records, recorded by superior technicians, and played on this old technology is far superior to the sound of CDs played on digital appliances. Did you say that? It's one of the first things we talked about. And you said it's the superior sound. And then another time we went out to a restaurant and we decided to go and have Mexican food. So I took a drive down, Ventura Boulevard, and went past a number of places. And at one point you said, hey, let's go in here. I've often eaten over there in that Mexican restaurant. El Grande Sombrero, or whatever it was. And I said, well, hold on there just a minute, Joe. Let's go down a little further. And let's go to Casa Viga, right? Just to try out something new. You've never been there before, right? Okay, come on in. We go in. We have a Mexican meal. And when we're finished, Joe's sitting there across from me from the table, and he says, that was really good. That was best Mexican food I've had out here in the valley. And I said, oh, you mean it was superior? He said, yeah, that was superior to any other Mexican restaurant. Right here, Casa Viga. So how many times does one use this word, superior? It's common and it's natural to use it. It comes from the basic recognition of things that are done in an excellent way. right? So you go to an auto mechanic, you go to get your Saab repaired, and you get it from the garage, and a day or so later, or maybe the same day, it breaks down again with the same problem or some other problem until finally you find a mechanic who has superior skills. So the semantics of white supremacy goes there. It goes to superior skills, superior achievement. It does not go to a concept of supremacy in the sense of lording it over everyone else and ruling over everyone else. It goes to the occasion of doing things better than others do them. So my definition of white supremacy is simply that. Can you take that on board, Joe? And he says, yeah, I guess so. You're kind of making sense here. I'm not sure if I follow your line of reasoning or the way you work this out. And I say, well, Joe, it's really easy. It goes back to Socrates. You know, Joe, it's rather amazing when you reflect on it about how certain essential issues go back to Socrates. For instance, I don't know if you've read Aristotle. And Joe furrows his brow and he says, yeah, well, I think I did read him once, or at least I read an adult comics version of his Metaphysics. I said, great, that was very amusing, I read that too. But if you read Aristotle's Metaphysics, he makes a claim. And he credits Socrates with two achievements. The first was that Socrates sought definitions in the moral sphere. And he did it systematically. He had a method of conversation which allowed him, in discussion with others, to arrive at definitions of what is moral and good and right. So he discussed such concepts as truth, goodness, and beauty. But he didn't do it in an abstract way, you know, Joe, because Aristotle also credited him with a second achievement, which was that he introduced a method of inductive argument. What inductive argument means is really simple. It means to argue from individual to general cases. So that's what I've done in our conversation here on the fence this afternoon. So I cited individual cases. The old-fashioned sound system that you have that produces superior sound, especially when you're playing vinyls that are recorded on Deutsche Grammophon. I don't think Metallica recorded on that label, but you get my point. And then you have the example of a really good Mexican meal superior to what you find in other restaurants, and the example of a car mechanic. So those are all individual cases which build the ground for making a wider general observation. So I feel, I'm confident that my definition of white superiority is honest and simple and well-founded on individual cases. And do you know how many of those individual cases there are on record? Joe looks at me, just squinting his eyes. He's got a little savvy look in the corner of his eyes. And he says, you're talking about evidence, right? Yeah, Joe, I'm talking about evidence. The evidence and the proof of superior achievement in any area you can name. Science, art, engineering, mechanics, all the fields of study of nature, astronomy, everything you can think of. Name 50 categories of human pursuit of knowledge and practical use of that knowledge. And then look at the record of achievement of the white races. I let that sink in for a moment. And then I said, listen, Joe, if you want to investigate this further, I can refer you to a book. It's called Human Accomplishment. Wow, that's quite a title. And the author is Charles Murray. Now I have to say that I would advise a caveat regarding this book. It's very clear that Charles Murray is a libertarian and even wrote a book about being a libertarian. And there's some indication, some evidence from the dedication in his book that he might have had Albanian handlers. But nevertheless, the book is a record of facts. It contains many elaborate graphs. It analyzes human achievements around the whole world in different historical epochs. And the takeaway of this book is that about 95% of everything that was ever achieved at a superior level in literature, philosophy, the arts, and in practical matters such as science, engineering, medicine, has been the accomplishment of people who belong to the white races. We hear the birds twittering, and I see it takes a while for this one to sink in. And then I see something come up behind his eyes, old Joe, and he looks at me with his eyes narrowed, and he says, "Are you implying that there is something innate racially? Because you say achievement of the white races. So are you implying that they are somehow innately or racially superior to all the other races?" Well, now I can see that we've reached a delicate moment in the conversation, and I don't want the dialogue to go off track. So I proposed this to Joe. I said, well, look, Joe, we've reached the point in our conversation of a fork in the road. Now, we could go off into a conversation about racism. And we could even agree to discuss the question, is the concept of human accomplishment, which is the title of this book, really corrupted by racism? But that would be another conversation. And if you don't mind, I would like to complete our conversation based on the premises that we started with. Okay. He nods and he says, okay. And I say, if you'll bear with me, Joe, just for a moment, I would like to close off that other topic of conversation by making an observation. If you look at the world today, in terms of racism and racial hatred and condemnation of certain races, well, I think the evidence is very clear that the white races are the target of the most vicious and widespread condemnation in the entire world. Whiteness is something bad, categorically bad. Many people have said that, and they've said it openly and publicly, and they haven't been criticized or opposed in saying so. So it's open game on Whitey these days. Have you noticed that? Now I have to say that Joe is also white like me. And so this assertion, obviously hits a funny bone. But he nods and he says, yeah, I've seen a lot of that anti-white rhetoric. And so I say, not to push it too far, but just to complete the observation, I'd like to ask you this, and then we can have another conversation that leads in the direction that my question is pointing. I'd like to ask you how come it appears that all the other races of the world, non-white, want to enjoy everything that the white peoples have created, but they want to do it without the white people being there. How come? What would you say about an attitude like that? And I can see I've really hit him frontally right now, and he doesn't actually know what to say. So to ease off the topic and to move on to conclude our conversation, I say, well, it's something to consider, and you might consider that attitude, wanting all the great conveniences of life that white people have created, such as trams. Love to use the example of trams. Love to ride on those trams in the cities of Europe. And I say, when you consider wanting to have all they created and all the buildings and cities that they created and the infrastructure of society, without having them around, you might consider that to be the most immensely grotesque example of ingratitude that could ever be imagined. So, Joe, I propose that the next time we might have a conversation about anti-whiteism, anti-white rhetoric, and we might talk about the issue of gratitude. And he nods and he says, good, okay, I can see he's not comfortable with going further on that fork of the road. So I direct the conversation back to the main topic in order to reach a conclusion. So there's a pause. Joe is looking down at the ground. He's wearing flip-flops on his feet. He's kind of shifting his toes around in his flip-flops. So it's an uncomfortable pause, and I say, well, how about this? How about I ask you if there's something you're feeling uncomfortable about? And he looks up at me, and now his chin is sticking out a little bit assertively, and he says, yeah, there is. I get it, that there might be a record of superior achievements by white people. Maybe, the evidence is there, maybe it's undeniable, but what about all the bad things they have done as well? Colonization, slavery. What about all the bad things that they have done? What do you have to say about that, John? And I say, well, I've looked at that very carefully. I've looked at that argument. And I would have to say, just to round out our conversation in an amiable way, that no matter what evil they might have committed in the world, the white races, is it really more serious than any other races have committed? And considering that the white races have committed evil and perpetrated harm and been dominant and suppressive of other races in some ways. Well, haven't all races done that to each other in some way? And all the other races that have done that have committed their own evils, standing apart from the evils attributed to the white man, they've done all that and contributed almost nothing at all on the side of enduring excellence that serves everyone who wants to live comfortably and happily on this planet. Have you considered that? White people don't have a monopoly on evil. Evil has no color. All races have committed evil and crimes against other races. Go look into it. And it goes on today. Look what happens in Africa, tribally. Look what happens in Asia. Look at slavery around the world today. Slavery around the world today cannot be blamed on the white man. And so, whether or not white people have committed as much evil as other races, I see no evidence that those other races who committed evil in their way contributed anything close to what the white races have done for the betterment and comfort and convenience of life on this planet. The final chorus of twittering birds. And I look at Joe, and I see his body posture is not aggressive, but he's uncertain. He's shifting on his flip-flops. And he looks at me and he levels his eyes. He says, okay. Well, that's not a bad conversation there we've been having for half an hour. And maybe we'll pick it up again some other time. I need to go and reflect on this, especially on this question of the balance between the evil that white people are said to have committed and the evidence of what they have done for the world, for all races, to the contrary. And on that happy note, I turn away, and Joe goes back to his house to listen to Metallica on his old-fashioned tubular sound system. Absolutely superior sound, if you've ever heard it. CDs and elaborate IT reproduction of music doesn't even come close to the beauty and depth of that sound. And I go home. I go in the kitchen. And I sit down and have a cup of coffee from a private company that produces a really superior brew. Enough said, and I'll be seeing you in the beauty to come.